Hello, debaters. Let's talk about splitting the negative block. During and after the 2AC, it's time for the negative team to make some important strategic decisions. At this point in the debate, a good negative team has 7 or 8 arguments that they made in the 1NC. After a good thrashing by the 2AC, some of those arguments are dead, some are on life support, and some are alive and kicking. The negative team needs to discuss all 7 or 8 arguments, but it's up to the negative team to decide how to split up the arguments in the negative block. This is important because without deciding ahead of time, it's possible that some arguments get dropped while others get discussed by both negative speakers, and you want to avoid those 2 scenarios at all costs. So splitting the block is a conversation, and it's a conversation that must happen between the 2 members of the negative team. You don't want a scenario where the 2N just talks about his or her favorite arguments and then the 1NR has to pick up all the leftovers. Instead, you want to estimate the amount of time you'll need to spend on each argument and divide them between the 2 speeches. For those arguments that are dead or dying, you may only want to spend 30 seconds or so on each argument because you aren't going to win those arguments anyway. So why spend a lot of time talking about them? For those arguments that are beaten up pretty badly, but maybe still have some life in them, you may want to spend a minute or 2 discussing, just in case you can bring them back to life enough that the judge still considers them to be effective and viable. And for those arguments that are still very much alive and kicking, that's where you want to dedicate the most time. Maybe even the majority of a speech if necessary. These are the arguments where you really want to take time to talk about how the important, effective, and crucial they are. Here's an example of the arguments you might have made thus far as the negative team. Eliminating drones doesn't mean eliminating surveillance. Drones are cheaper. Eliminating drones would require us to use more resources and people. Drones save more lives. Eliminating drones would require us to risk military lives. Drones keep us safe. Drones stop terrorism. Okay, so now let's say the affirmative team spends 8 minutes using their front lines to try and neutralize your arguments. And let's say that the affirmative team totally decimates number 1, number 2, and number 5. These were pretty strong arguments by the negative, but the affirmative team was ready for them and had lots of great evidence. Now let's say that the affirmative team beats up on number 3 and 4. These arguments weren't too strong in the first place, but the affirmative didn't really have much evidence to prove that these things weren't true. So these arguments are just sort of on life support. And it may not be worth it to spend a lot of time trying to save them. But let's say that number 6 and number 7 really caught the affirmative team by surprise. Their front lines didn't have good evidence, and they didn't really offer a lot of analysis. Now, it's time for us to talk about how the negative team splits the block. Let's say you're the first negative, so you get the 5-minute rebuttal, and your partner is the second negative, so she gets the 8-minute constructive. In the 13-minute negative block, you and your partner have to discuss all 7 arguments. The good news is that there is no right answer, partially because this example is too abstract. You don't know how much evidence you actually have for each area, and partially because you and your teammate might have different speaking styles, which might make a difference in how you split the block. But generally speaking, here are some really good tips for using this specific example. First, note that items number 6 and number 7 are really similar. If you decided that one of you should take both arguments, you might make it harder for the judge to tell the difference between the 2 arguments. And if they start to run together in the judge's mind, it weakens both arguments. So splitting the arguments not only lets them stand apart, it also presents a unified front because you and your partner both get to speak about oppression and authority for a solid length of time. More importantly, if you each take an argument which you are winning, you both look really good. Some teams make the mistake of letting one partner take all the winning arguments and giving the other partner all the leftovers. And this makes the team look imbalanced, like one speaker is amazing and the other one is not so good. So this hurts your chances of winning. Second, I hope you didn't spend too long discussing the arguments that you were losing. If you decided to spend more than 30 seconds to a minute on each, you might be robbing yourself of valuable time you could be spending on the arguments you are winning. Third, I hope you saved the maximum amount of time for number 6 and number 7 because they are the arguments you are most likely to win on. That doesn't mean you wouldn't win on the other arguments, and you shouldn't kick any arguments you don't absolutely have to. A good debate team can effectively cover their best and weakest arguments in the block. So that's all you need to know for now about how to split the block. The most important thing to know is how important it is that you and your partner discuss your strategy prior to the 2NC. And the rest is often trial and error, especially during your first few tournaments when it is difficult to predict how long arguments will take and which arguments you may or may not be winning. Remember that the more efficient you and your partner are as a team and as individual speakers, the more you can show off your skills. That's it for now. Have fun splitting all your negative blocks, and good luck, debaters.